September 2015. A heavy atmosphere enveloped the low-lying forest along the banks of Julington Creek, more than 20 miles from downtown Jacksonville, Florida. The beam from Deputy Sheriff Mark Redding's flashlight pierced through the thick fog, shining down on the damp, churned-up ground where something had just emerged from beneath the mud. "Central, I need the forensics team at the old Julington Creek area. We might have just found a body." His voice echoed softly over the radio, blending into the humming of insects and the chill river mist. What had started as a routine survey by the Cold Case Unit had now become something entirely different, something that would answer the questions that had haunted Jacksonville for over 3 decades. Beneath the damp, decaying soil, fragments of human bone and a silver necklace engraved with CR had just been uncovered, coinciding with the closing bell on the mysterious disappearance of Caroline Rhodes in 1983. For over 30 years, the Caroline Rhodes case had existed only in the faded memories of the residents along the St. Johns River. A dedicated elementary school teacher who vanished from her brightly lit home, doors still locked, car still in the driveway, a cup of cold coffee on the doorstep. 32 years later, advances in retroactive forensic technology, re-examination techniques for old evidence, had changed everything. Blood samples, reanalyzed with DNA, ribbons scanned with digital imaging, and the lines on an old typewriter suddenly became an undeniable confession. When the investigation results pointed to the prime suspect, the ex-husband Thomas Murray, a linguistics professor respected by the community, all of Jacksonville was shaken. The discovery of the body at Julington Creek didn't just close a disappearance case. It was the first domino in a chain of events that exposed secrets buried beneath the calm facade of a small community for 3 decades. Because when authorities finally issued an arrest warrant for Murray in 2015, it wasn't a drifter or an anonymous criminal, but someone who had lived among them, taught their children, attended victim memorials, and maintained an innocent facade while hiding a horrific truth. The Caroline Rhodes case wasn't just a mystery solved, it was a testament to the perseverance of people who refused to let the case file gather dust, to the power of forensic science that gave voice to a victim silenced for too long. It was also the story of a community once divided by suspicion and of justice, though late, never buried. Tonight, we'll retrace the 1983 disappearance, follow the investigation that spanned over 30 years, and uncover the twist that rocked Florida, the longest-running cold case that science ever brought back to life. This is the story of loss, perseverance, deception, and delayed justice, but not denied. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. Late June evening in 1983, the quiet neighborhood along the St. Johns River in Jacksonville was steeped in the thick, humid air of a Florida summer. The pale yellow glow from streetlights cast faint light on the sidewalks, stretching long shadows of tree branches swaying in the breeze. In the small white-painted house at the end of River Oaks Drive, Caroline Rhodes, 34, an elementary school teacher, had just folded a stack of her students' notebooks. Summer vacation had just begun. Her 6-year-old daughter was staying with her grandmother in Gainesville, and Caroline was spending the evening tidying up, preparing materials for the new school year. Around 8 o'clock, a neighbor, Mary Wilkins, saw Thomas Murray, Caroline's ex-husband, pull up in his brown Ford and park in the driveway. He stepped out of the car, briefcase in hand, his demeanor calm and polite as always. The two talked on the porch, their voices moderate, enough to catch intermittent whispers mingling with the chirping crickets down the street. "Mrs. Wilkins," said Caroline, seemed tense, arms crossed over her chest, while Murray just stood still, occasionally bowing his head. Around 8:30 he left. The living room lights were still on, the door closed, the Ford rolling slowly out of the street. After that, the neighborhood returned to its familiar quiet. A few neighbors out for late evening walks still saw the light in the small house, but no one paid it any mind. By midnight, the lights were still on, the radio still playing a country music program, but there was no longer a figure by the window. The next morning, Larry Bennett, Caroline's boyfriend, called her. The phone rang long with no answer. He called back a few times, then got a strange, busy signal. Sensing something wrong, Larry drove to River Oaks. The front door was locked, the curtains drawn tight. Caroline's silver Chevrolet was still neatly parked in the driveway. He knocked on the door, calling her name loudly. No response. A chill crept in as he circled to the back of the house. Trying the kitchen door, it was locked too. On the stoop, a half-full cup of coffee had gone cold. There were no signs of a struggle, no note left behind. As the sun rose, the heat blanketed the neighborhood, and Larry ran to the payphone at the corner. His voice cracked as he told the dispatcher. She would never just disappear like this. Something's wrong. Less than 10 minutes later, the first Jacksonville Police Department patrol car turned into the neighborhood. The short siren wail shattered the quiet morning. The police officers stepped out, surveying the quiet house with its tightly shut doors and the living room lights still on. Larry Bennett still stood on the porch, gripping the payphone he'd just hung up. He tried to stay calm, but his voice trembled as he recounted. I called from early morning, no one picked up. The door's still locked. Her car is here. She would never leave without telling me. An officer nodded, asking him to step back while they checked the front door. The lock was intact, no signs of tampering. When the door swung open, a faint bleach smell wafted out, chillingly out of place in the muggy morning. The house inside was tidy, but something was off-kilter. The living room rug was slightly curled at one corner, the armchair pushed back from the table, a potted plant by the window tipped over, soil scattered faintly on the floor. The scene wasn't enough to confirm a fight, but it wasn't normal either. One officer bent down, touching a dark smudge on the cabinet leg, a faint metallic scent lingering. He exchanged a quiet word with his colleague, then they moved on through the hallway to the kitchen. The floor was damp, slick, the light catching in glossy streaks. It felt like someone had wiped it down in a hurry, not waiting for it to dry. On the table, the coffee cup sat beside the stack of notebooks, the steam long gone, a black residue settled at the bottom. The back bedroom was still neat, clothes in the closet undisturbed, jewelry intact. Everything was too orderly, to the point of suspicion. A house with no signs of break-in, but the owner vanished, leaving behind a bleach smell and a few small traces that sent chills down the spine. When an officer signaled for the K9 to lead the way, the dog lowered its nose to the floor, whined softly, and headed straight for the back door. They followed the scent trail around the yard, along the fence, until the dog stopped at a shady corner, barking softly. Under a small tree, in the tangled grass, they spotted something black. Caroline's purse. Inside, her wallet, Idaho, keys, even her library card, were all there. No signs of robbery, no money taken, no personal items missing. The purse seemed like it had been tossed away in haste, but not taken along. The police exchanged silent glances. If this was a robbery, everything couldn't be this intact. One murmured. She knew this person. The atmosphere in the neighborhood shifted. A few neighbors gathered on the porch, whispering about the friendly woman who still taught the kids piano every afternoon. Everyone tried to find a reasonable explanation for her disappearance, but none rang true. By noon, the area around the house was cordoned off with yellow tape. Another group of officers began combing the alley leading to the main road, a possible escape route for whoever took Caroline. The ground was still wet from last night's rain, bearing a few jumbled shoe prints, direction unclear, just known to be larger than her shoe size. As the sun blazed down on the street, the bleach smell from inside the house hadn't dissipated, clinging to the heavy air. A young officer stared into the empty living room, shaking his head slightly. If she just went somewhere, why clean the floor like this? No one answered. Out on the porch, Larry sat on the steps, hands clasped together, eyes fixed on the figures coming and going between the crime scene tapes. Across the river, the wind carried salty mist, rustling through the trees, making the nylon tape flaps flutter. The sense that something had been erased too thoroughly left everyone silent. Caroline Rhodes had vanished, and the only traces left in the small house were enough to suggest one truth: last night, someone had been there with her. When the forensics team arrived, the house on River Oaks Drive was fully sealed off. Midday sun beat down on the yellow tape stretched around the fence, fluttering faintly in the humid breeze. Inside, the bleach smell still lingered, mixing with the scent of old wood and river damp seeping through the door cracks. The technicians in white protective suits moved carefully across the floor, the click of camera shutters echoing in the still space. The scene commander, Lieutenant Mark Redding, then in his early 30s, ordered all the house lights turned off. He drew the curtains, then switched on the ultraviolet blacklight brought from the van. The pale blue light swept across the floor, and almost immediately, faint luminous streaks appeared along the staircase, disjointed shapes, like small drops trailed and then hastily wiped away. "There's blood here," Redding said quietly, bending down to examine it closely. Beneath the wooden floorboards, they noticed a partially wiped patch, still bearing circular marks from a cloth or brush. Each time the light passed over it, the streak glowed a deep purple. The smear trailed in a band toward the kitchen door, then vanished at the baseboard. The technicians began numbering the scene. One knelt down, carefully swabbing the darkest spot with a cotton tip, sealing the sample in a small plastic vial. Another photographed the faint shoe prints on the wooden floor, swirling rubber sole patterns, large size, matching common men's athletic shoes. "Doesn't match the victim's shoe size," Redding noted, but his voice was even and low, emotionless. They moved on to the living room area. Under the table, a beige fabric fiber was caught on a wood nail, small and frayed, like shirting or a cleaning rag. It was picked up with tweezers and dropped into a separate nylon bag. Near the sofa, there was a faint drag mark on the carpet, not deep enough to prove something was pulled, but enough to form a streak over 1/2 meter long. A tipped-over potted plant, soil scattered around the table leg, and a faint smear mixed in that looked like something had soaked in, then been cleaned with a bleach solution. Caroline's home office was in the corner of the house, small and tidy, papers neatly stacked, a few notebooks and handwritten drafts left open on the desk. In the center, an IBM Selectric 2 typewriter dusted lightly, power cord still plugged in. Redding pressed a key experimentally. The mechanical clack sounded dry, the type ball spinning slightly, revealing fresh ink ribbon. He signaled the technician to photograph the entire setup and disassemble the machine per evidence sealing protocol. "Keep the ribbon intact, don't touch the keys," he instructed. No one knew that this small detail, an ordinary typewriter, would become the most crucial piece of evidence in the case 3 decades later. The technicians continued sweeping the light around the walls and staircase base. Under a thin layer of paint, the blue glow revealed tiny pinpoint spatter, distributed in an arc, classic signs of blood cast from a high-impact blow. The extent of the spread indicated it wasn't just a scuffle. One murmured, "She might have been attacked right here." Redding stayed silent, just nodding. No signs of forced entry, no valuables missing, TV, clock, jewelry all intact. Everything in the house pointed in one direction. The victim knew whoever entered. Outside, the sunlight had turned harsh gold. The bleach smell faded gradually, replaced by a faint metallic tang from the samples being collected. The entire scene was fully marked by that afternoon. Blood samples, shoe prints, fabric fiber, the typewriter, and a few other items, carefully sealed and boxed for evidence. As they prepared to leave, Redding turned back for a look through the open door, where faint light fell on the wooden staircase. It was all too clean, too neat, like someone had spent hours erasing everything, except the traces ordinary light couldn't see. As the forensics team loaded up, the neighborhood had settled into dusk. Wind from the river rose, making the crime scene tape flap wildly. On the porch, Larry Bennett still sat motionless, his blank gaze following each evidence box carried away. No one told him anything, but everyone understood in that small house an assault had taken place, and the woman named Caroline Rhodes likely hadn't left it on her own 2 feet. That afternoon, Florida sun poured down like fire. The small house along the St. Johns River was completely sealed off. Yellow crime scene tape stretched from the backyard all the way to the dirt alley connecting to Julington Creek. On the map, the search area expanded to a 5-mile radius, encompassing the riverbank, winding creek, and the damp lowlands forest around it. The crackle of walkie-talkies mixed with the huffing of canine dogs, the air thick with the scent of crushed grass and river mud. Sergeant Don Hargrove commanded the search team. He divided the groups, a water team heading downstream in metal boats, a land team following the dirt path behind the house. The lead dog tugged hard on the leash, nose pressed to the ground, veering straight through the wooden fence where Caroline's purse had been found that morning. The grass there was still flattened, leaning in one direction. Hargrove followed, eyes scanning the damp earth, where blades of grass were dragged into a narrow trail leading to the mangrove thicket. As sunlight slanted down, the first group spotted unusual mud marks. A shallow drag trail stretched nearly 2 meters, about shoulder-width wide, fading at the water's edge. Next to it were 2 crossed shoe prints, larger than a woman's size. The technician bent down to photograph and measure, then pointed out fresh mud smears. Something heavy was dragged here, then lifted up. Hargrove didn't respond, just noted the drag direction. Across the way, a few local fishing club volunteers swept through palmetto thickets, occasionally bending to pick up small items. Louise Carter, the young female technician from the morning scene, paused at a dense grass clump. On the leaves, she spotted a beige fabric fiber snagged, frayed, dusted with dirt. This sample matched the fiber found in Caroline's living room exactly. She plucked it with forceps into a paper bag, marked it, then looked up toward the creek. River wind flipped the dry reeds, revealing the murky yellow water, still as oil. If it was dragged from the house to here, she said quietly. That person had to know the path well. Downstream, the water team revved the boat, scanning sonar along the muddy bank. The motor echoed sporadically, blending with cicada buzz and wind-rustling young pines. A local rescue diver with an air tank tested the area under the bridge footings, but surfaced after a few minutes, gasping. 2 feet of mud, nothing. They marked the spot, planning to return tomorrow at tide change. On shore, the land team fanned into the low forest, where the ground was drier and carpeted thick with fallen pine needles. Hargrove led, flashlight in hand despite the daylight, sweeping tree bases. On the trunk of a small pine, he spotted a hand-length dark streak, crusted over, like old blood. Louise swabbed a sample, said nothing, just packed it carefully, and stood. Nearby, an officer pointed to tangled roots underfoot. Amid the decaying leaves was a palm-sized fabric scrap, beige, edges frayed. As it was lifted, a damp, musty smell wafted up. She compared it to the existing sample, same fiber, same color. Afternoon shadows lengthened. The canine lost the trail at the water's edge, where mud mixed with sand dispersed the scent. The dog snuffled, circled, then stopped at a section with 2 shallow tire ruts. The dirt path there was just wide enough for a small pickup to pass. Hargrove eyed the rut direction. The road to the main highway was less than 100 yards away. If someone took Caroline by vehicle, that was the only convenient exit without anyone in the neighborhood seeing. Near dusk, a man living by the river brought out a lantern, telling Ray Molina, the land team lid, that he'd heard strange noises the night before. Around 11, an old engine sputtered a few times, then cut off. After that, dead quiet. I thought poachers fishing. Ray nodded, asking the vehicle's direction. He pointed to this dirt path. That small tip left everyone silent for a moment. As night fell, the group returned to Caroline's house. River wind dragged in cold damp, mixing with lingering mud and bleach smells in the silent home. Along the fence, handheld lights swept over wooden stakes marking spots where the fabric was found, the drag marks, tire tracks. Each location was a faint puzzle piece, but pieced together, the picture sharpened, an assault inside. Then someone dragged the victim out this way, to the water's edge. possibly loaded into a vehicle. Louise paused at the back door, peering through the foggy glass into the darkened kitchen. Inside, the flat blackness reflected nothing. She recalled the faint purple glow under the stairs from the blacklight sweep, small drops smearing like hasty wipes. It all connected, from those marks to the flattened grass and snagged fabric on leaves. No doubt left, it started in that lit house and ended somewhere along this waterway. As patrol cars flicked on headlights, the beams swept the dusty dirt alley, illuminating tree canopies darkening in the night. Everyone packed gear, K9s loaded into vehicles, and the search area fell quiet. In the last twilight, the crime scene tape fluttered before the wind, reflecting the red of the setting sun. No one voiced what they thought, but everyone knew Caroline Rhodes had been attacked in her own home, and that night, her body might have left the place in a vehicle, as silently as she vanished from their lives. The next morning, as the search continued along Julington Creek, police shifted focus to the last person seen with Caroline, Thomas Murray, her ex-husband. He was a linguistics professor at the University of North Florida, living alone in an apartment less than 10 minutes' drive from the scene. Their marriage had ended over a year earlier, after prolonged tension over child custody. Though divorced, they stayed in touch for their 6-year-old, who lived with her grandmother. That noon, when 2 officers knocked on Murray's apartment door, he opened it with a surprised but composed expression. The small apartment was tidy, his desk piled with papers, grammar books, and lecture drafts. When asked about the evening of June 12th, he answered without hesitation, "I went to see Caroline around 7. She invited me over to discuss our daughter. We talked for a bit, then I left. She was fine." His voice was even, almost unwavering. The officer pressed for details on departure time. Murray said he left her house around 8:30, then went home, read and graded student papers. He emphasized they'd had a civilized conversation, no arguments. When a young officer noticed a thin cut on his right palm, Murray explained, "I got nicked by paper while grading, no big deal." He held out his hand, smiling politely, but his eyes were cool, as if eager to end the topic. Throughout the interview, Murray showed no defensiveness. He offered them coffee, patiently answering each question. When informed Caroline was missing, he just furrowed his brow slightly, saying, "I don't believe that. She might be at her mother's." No panic, no anger, just a chilling calm that left those present puzzled. Back in the River Oaks neighborhood, police continued taking statements. Mary Wilkins, Caroline's neighbor, firmly confirmed seeing Murray's brown Ford F-150 pickup parked in front around 7 that evening. "I recognized it right away," she said. "He'd been here many times before the divorce." Another resident 2 houses down also confirmed seeing the same truck leave around 9, headlights off as it hit the main road. This information zeroed the investigation on Murray. Vehicle records confirmed he owned a 1978 brown F-150, used for years. They inspected the truck, finding no blood or matching mud from the scene, but the interior was spotless, floor mats newly replaced. When asked, Murray said simply, "I clean the truck every weekend. I can't stand old smells." From a professional standpoint, everything around him was just plausibly reasonable. No incriminating evidence, no conflicting statements, just uncanny coincidences, timing, location, and relationship to the victim. Lieutenant Mark Redding, the lead investigator, observed Murray through the interview room glass, the tall, lean professor with graying hair, face nearly expressionless. Redding knew this type: smart, controlled speech, law-savvy, and skilled at answering without slipping. When asked one last time if anyone could confirm he was home that night, Murray shook his head. "I live alone, but if needed, you can ask the neighbors. They must have seen my truck parked." He said it with a faint smile, but without looking anyone in the eye. The conversation lasted more than an hour. When the officers left, Murray shook hands with each one, thanking them for working for justice. No one could arrest him, no legal basis, just a heavy hunch hanging in the minds of everyone who left that apartment. Late afternoon, Redding returned to the riverside scene. He stood looking toward the forest where the drag marks had been found the day before. River wind rustled through the mangrove leaves. In his mind, only one image remained: Murray's calm gaze when he heard the news of Caroline's disappearance. Not a single question of what happened, not a flicker of real surprise. As night fell, the lights in the riverside neighborhood gradually came on. In that darkness, only one name echoed in the file: Thomas Murray, the composed, intelligent ex-husband, and the last person seen with Caroline Rhodes. The Jacksonville Police Department's lab was on the second floor of an old building, where fluorescent lights always cast a cold blue-white glow that made everything seem frigid. In the room filled with the smell of alcohol and bleach, technician Louise Carter, the one who had been directly at the scene, opened the sealed evidence box from Caroline Rhodes' house. In front of her were 3 items: test tubes containing blood samples collected at the base of the stairs, a small nylon bag holding the beige fabric fiber, and a photo of the shoe print on the wooden floor. Everything was numbered in red ink, carefully taped shut. The blood sample was processed first. At that time, in 1983, the concept of DNA had only just been mentioned in scientific circles, not yet used in forensics. Louise had to rely on the classic ABO blood typing method, the only way to link the blood sample to the victim. Under the microscope, the dried cells were dissolved in a reaction solution. When the liquid turned a pale brown, she knew she had the result: O+. The same type as Caroline, according to the medical records her mother had just provided. Louise recorded the result, but it didn't lighten her heart. In criminal science back then, a blood type match wasn't definitive evidence. In the state of Florida, nearly 40% of the population was O+. That meant millions of people could yield the exact same result. However, what caught her attention wasn't the blood type, but the way the blood was distributed. The spattered drops around the stairs formed a spatter pattern, small streaks fanning out, typical when a victim is struck with a hard object at close range. She presented the results to Lieutenant Redding. He read silently, then said just one thing: that blood couldn't be accidental. She was beaten in the house, but even if he believed it, it still wasn't enough for court. No body, no murder weapon, just a few dried blood drops, proving Caroline was injured, not that she was dead. The next day they continued with the shoe print. The enlarged photo showed a wavy sole pattern, size about 10, common men's athletic shoes from those years. Upon comparison, the technicians noticed a detail. This sole matched the low-top Converse All-Star brand, sold everywhere, including a store Thomas Murray had visited. But like the blood, a match in type didn't mean a match in person. They could only note consistent in pattern and size, a phrasing more limiting than conclusive. The beige fabric scrap was sent to the fiber analysis section. Under the polarizing microscope, the fiber showed a cotton rayon blend structure, plain weave, with the characteristic ivory color of men's office shirts. No brand could be identified, but this fiber type was compatible with threads from a shirt cuff that had been abraded. Louise recalled that when they first met Murray, he was wearing a light-colored shirt, buttoned all the way to the collar. Even though every detail pointed in the same direction, everything still teetered on the thin line between suspicion and proof. Redding walked past each lab table, looking at the results, hands on his hips. We have her blood, men's shoe prints, fabric from men's clothing, but no one can say that person was Murray, he said. And without a body, the court won't listen. Outside in the hallway, the ceiling fan creaked in the sweltering afternoon. Louise looked at the thin stack of test results, feeling helpless. She knew that just a bit more advanced technology, a DNA sample, a hair fiber, even a drop of sweat, would let them know for sure who had been in Caroline's house that night. But in 1983, all they had were microscopes and intuition. A few days later, Redding brought the file to the state prosecutor's office for consultation. The person in charge at the time, Assistant District Attorney Ed Marks, reviewed everything and set the papers down, his tone nonchalant. Blood type match, shoe size match, fabric type match. I see all matches but nothing unique. Can't prosecute without a body. Redding bit his lip, silent. He knew he couldn't argue. The law at the time required corpus delicti, physical evidence that a crime had occurred. A missing person, even with blood in the house, could still be considered to have left voluntarily. In the press, the case was noted briefly: local teacher missing, police suspect foul play. After a few weeks, the news faded. At the lab, the evidence box was closed, sealed, and sent to storage under file code FJ83 6112. Louise affixed the final label to the lid, placing it on the metal shelf next to dozens of other unsolved cases. As she turned off the lights to leave, she glanced back. The rows of silent paper boxes, like unfinished stories in the dark. And among them, the Caroline Rhodes case was just a thin file with a few dried blood drops, and the fragile belief that someday science would be strong enough to speak for justice. In the days after the analysis results came back, the investigation shifted to interviewing those around Caroline, people who might have heard, seen, or known what happened that June night. Lieutenant Redding believed that if the physical evidence couldn't speak, perhaps someone had heard something they thought was normal at the time. The Riverside neighborhood had fewer than 20 houses, mostly middle-aged families or retirees. Police knocked on every door, starting with the two adjacent to Caroline's. Mrs. Mary Wilkins, the first to report seeing Murray arrive that day, recounted the story. They talked for about half an hour on the porch. She stood with her arms crossed, and he bowed his head, seeming like he was explaining. Not loud, but not pleasant. She added that around 7:50, she still saw the light in Caroline's house, then drew the curtains to sleep, hearing nothing more. 3 houses down, an old man named Graham Moore, a retired electrician living alone, recalled a different detail. Around 8 or a bit later, I heard someone arguing. A man's voice, older, loud, and the woman's voice, small and choked. I thought it was some couple fighting, didn't pay attention. When played a recording of Murray's voice from the previous interview, he hesitated, then nodded. This voice sounds just like it. Slow rhythm, heavy, with the same pauses. Police tried to track down more leads. They went to the elementary school where Caroline taught. Her colleagues said she was private, rarely complaining about personal matters, but in the weeks before she vanished, she seemed tired. She said the divorce was done, but she still had to see her ex-husband because of their daughter. Once she even said, "He won't let go." At the time, we thought she meant emotionally. Another teacher remembered Caroline asking her husband to fix the back door lock, but then saying no need, because Tom will come check. Caroline's family came from Gainesville to Jacksonville to work with police. Her mother, Helen Rhodes, said through tears that Caroline would never leave home without telling. She hated worrying her mom. No matter what, she would call. And before she went missing, she even sent me a list of things for Kiara to take to school next week. Redding fell silent upon hearing it. Everyone who knew Caroline said the same. She had no reason to disappear voluntarily. When asked to return for questioning, Murray remained composed. He sat straight, hands clasped, voice steady like lecturing. "I didn't argue with Caroline," he said. "We had disagreements, but nothing heated. I left her house at 8:30. After that, I was home grading papers, didn't go out." When the investigator suggested a polygraph test, he smiled faintly, shaking his head. "I don't believe in those games. I teach language. I know how body reactions can be misinterpreted. An innocent person could still set off the machine." That attitude irritated Redding more than surprised him. Everyone felt the same. Everyone felt the same. Murray spoke too smoothly, controlling his language to leave no gaps. But in criminal investigations, hunches aren't enough for charges. No strange fingerprints, no DNA, no direct witnesses. Blood, fabric, shoe prints, all stopped at type match. When they reached other neighbors, every answer repeated the same truth. No one saw Caroline leave the house that night. No one saw her drive away. No one saw anyone with her. The silver Chevrolet sat still in the driveway, lightly dusted on the hood by morning. That meant no movement after Murray left, at least not in the victim's vehicle. A week later, The expanded investigation yielded no significant new results. The press began running short items, mentioning the sole suspect, but not naming him. Neighborhood gossip whispered about the overly calm ex-husband, but police couldn't advance. The state prosecutor's office recommended halting prosecution until new evidence, as can't build a murder case when the victim isn't confirmed dead. On his desk, Redding spread out scene photos, connecting traces with red lines, stairs, backyard, drag marks, riverbank. Everything stopped at the water's edge, as if Caroline's story ended there too. He looked at the notation on the cover of file FJ80, 36112, and folded it shut. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew the case had hit the ceiling. No body, no evidence, no legal basis. By the end of July 1983, the file was archived. The house by the St. Johns River stood silent and shuttered, crime scene tape removed. Neighborhood residents gradually returned to normal life, but each evening passing the house, they still glanced at the dark kitchen window, where Caroline had once stood brewing morning coffee on the day she vanished, and wondered what had really happened after the faint argument around 8 that evening. 3 months after Caroline Rhodes vanished, Florida's summer had passed, but her case remained stalled. Search teams ceased operations. The area around Julington Creek returned to nature. The crime scene tape that once fluttered in the wind now hung only as a few frayed, faded strips on the wooden fence. The St. Johns River returned to its original quiet, cloaked in a thin mist each evening, as if no investigation had ever taken place there. Lieutenant Redding still came to the office each morning, the stack of Caroline's case file piled in the corner of his desk. Every report, every test, every statement had been reviewed dozens of times. Nothing new. The faint shoe print on the floor, O+ blood sample, beige fabric scrap, neighbors' accounts of hearing an argument, all pieced together into a picture missing the center. No body, no weapon, no confession, and no one stepping forward as a witness. In a criminal case, that meant a closed door. In mid-September, the department held the final meeting on the Caroline Rhodes case. The small conference room, cold white light. Redding unrolled the search area map, the red dots marking along Julington Creek, now looking like ink blots. He pointed through each point, reading the list of surveyed areas: North Bank, South Bank, Palmetto Forest, Riverbed, Bridge 13. No additional evidence found. After a silence, a young officer spoke. Maybe she left the state, started a new life, Redding replied curtly. No one leaves behind their car, purse, and young child. The state prosecutor sent an official response a week later. Thin paper, bold typed text, no basis for criminal prosecution, file archived as unresolved missing person, probable homicide. Meaning, they believed Caroline was dead, but lacked legal evidence to confirm it. It was the kind of conclusion police hated most. Not a win, not a loss, just suspended between two states. On the day the file was submitted to storage, Redding personally affixed the label, FJ83 6112. He stared at the number for a long moment, then placed the paper box on the metal shelf, next to hundreds of other cases, missing persons likely murdered. The steel door of the storage room closed, cold air emanating, enveloping the evidence held by time, a few Polaroid photos, the IBM typewriter, the bag with the fabric scrap, and a copy of Larry Bennett's initial report, the man who called 911 that morning. As the case closed, those involved gradually left the story's rhythm. Caroline's family returned to Gainesville, taking 6-year-old Kiara, the only remnant of the old marriage. Thomas Murray resumed teaching, keeping his usual routine, giving no interviews, and not leaving Jacksonville. To his students, he remained the model professor, speaking slowly and precisely, never mentioning his ex-wife's name. All that remained was Redding, haunted by the unanswered question. He drove by the riverside house many times, looking at the porch where Caroline once stood, then turning toward the water. Everything seemed washed clean, no traces left. Each time he gazed at the dark water under the sunset, he always thought, she might still be somewhere around here. We just haven't looked in the right place. Time passed. The 1980s went by. Forensic technology began changing the world of criminal investigations. But the Caroline Rhodes case was never reopened. Her name faded into the list of Florida's missing persons. Each year, only a local paper mentioned it in a brief item, with a black and white photo of her smiling in the classroom. Caroline Rhodes' disappearance, 1983. No progress. And then, for the next 32 years, File FJ83 6112 lay dormant in the cold storage of the Jacksonville Police Department, gathering dust, but never fully forgotten. Because somewhere, in the dried blood drops, old fabric scrap and dusty typewriter, the truth was still waiting to be called awake. In the years that followed, Jacksonville changed day by day. New neighborhoods sprouted along the St. Johns River, concrete bridges replaced old wooden docks, and those who once lived in River Oaks gradually moved away. But deep in the concrete basement of the city police department, where the temperature was always kept at 10 degrees, the Caroline Rhodes case file lay silent. From 1984, the file box sat on shelf 6. Row B, labeled in red hash, FJ83 6112. Unresolved missing person, probable homicide. Inside, everything remained intact. The IBM Selectric typewriter wrapped in sealed cloth, plastic bags with dried blood samples, a few faded color Polaroid scene photos, and Caroline's calendar with her last handwriting, 7 p.m. Tom. No one touched it again. Time swept away the people who had investigated the case. Lieutenant Mark Redding left the force in the late 1990s, his hair nearly all gray. But in his personal journal, there was still a handwritten line. Caroline Rhodes, no ending. Louise Carter, the technician, then in her early 20s, later became head of forensics. She once proposed reopening the case in 1998, when DNA testing was first introduced in Florida, but the budget didn't allow reviewing cases without bodies. New cases, drug crimes, surging violence, pushed old files deeper into the shadows. In 2003, the first electronic storage system was implemented. Old files recoded. Box FJ83 6112 was scanned with a new code, but no supplemental data. No DNA samples, no new evidence, no arrested suspects. It was noted in the internal database with a single line. Pending identification of victim remains. Over those 3 decades, forensic technology advanced leaps and bounds. Labs in Tallahassee and Miami had begun using touch DNA, YSTR, then forensic imaging, tools unimaginable in 1983. But for a file without a body, without updated stored samples, it remained infeasible. Newcomers to the field might have read Caroline Rhodes' name in the list, but only as an old missing person case among thousands. Occasionally, a young reporter dug up archives for a commemorative article, Jacksonville's Unsolved Cases. In the reprinted black and white photo in the paper, Caroline still smiled gently, hair neatly tied, eyes bright with confidence. But no one remembered who she was anymore, only that she once lived by the river and vanished one summer night in 1983. It wasn't until early 2015, when the Jacksonville Police Department launched the Cold Case File Revival Project, that Caroline's story returned to the light. The project was partially funded by the Federal Justice Fund, aimed at reviewing unsolved cases with stored biological evidence. Hundreds of old file boxes were gradually moved from cold storage to the tech room, including those forgotten for over 30 years. One March morning, young technician Erica Dominguez, in the field less than 2 years, was assigned to check the FJ file row. When opening the list, she saw the name Rhodes, Caroline, 1983. The old file box, labeled with 3 overlapping layers, handwriting so faded it had to be read under a light. Inside, all evidence remained sealed, dry, unrotted. When Erica saw the IBM typewriter lying in the brown cloth bag, power cord wrapped around the base. She paused. The machine was heavy, covered in a thin layer of dust, the seal tag still bearing Lieutenant Redding's faded signature. She didn't know then that what she had just done, simply pulling the file box off the shelf, would become the first step to awakening a case that had slept for over 3 decades. Erica set the box on the table, opened her logbook. The first line she wrote, Case FJ83 6112, Caroline Rhodes, status, cold case, evidence intact. That day, the file was officially transferred to the Jacksonville PD's cold case unit. The steel door of the cold storage closed behind her. On the shelf, the remaining gap was just the width of one paper box, but that gap, after 32 years, had opened the path for the Caroline Rhodes case to be told once more. The evidence storage room was in the old basement of the Jacksonville Police Department. Pale fluorescent tube lights illuminated endless rows of metal shelves where thousands of file boxes stood packed side by side. Erica Dominguez, 26-year-old technician, bent down to push the cart holding files for revival that week. When reading the label FJ83 6112, Rhodes, Caroline, she stopped. This file box was older than the others, cardboard yellowed, but the seal intact. At the bottom corner of the label, a nearly ink-faded signature, M. Redding. Erica pulled on rubber gloves, gently breaking the seal. The smell of old paper and preservative rushed up, carrying the distinctive dampness of time. Inside, besides the small evidence bags, one item stood out at the box bottom, the IBM Selectric typewriter. She leaned down, touching the worn wrapping cloth, feeling the clear weight and chill of the metal. An old piece of tape stuck on the lid, handwritten, "Do not test, preserved until further notice." She lifted the machine out of the box, placing it on the examination table. When the angled light hit, the black ink ribbon faintly reflected, revealing unusual segmented gaps. Erica, a forensics tech graduate, knew that each keystroke left a micro-imprint on the ribbon, like the writer's fingerprint. She tilted the machine, examining closely, and saw in the ribbon section between two old text layers a faint sequence of characters, evenly spaced, but not in straight lines. A few letters clearer, "Make someone disappear. Make someone disappear." Erica held her breath, not daring to touch it further. She immediately noted it down, then called Lieutenant Mark Redding, who was now in charge of the cold case program. Just a few hours later, Redding, now in his 60s, with nearly all gray hair, appeared in the storage room. He stood silently for a moment in front of the typewriter, as if he couldn't believe the item he had sealed more than 30 years ago was still intact there. "You're the one who signed this tag?" Erica asked. Redding nodded, his eyes still fixed on the machine. "I remember it clearly. We took it from her desk, but back then, no one thought it was important." They decided to transfer all the evidence from the Caroline Rhodes case to the Florida State Lab. For the first time in 32 years, the dried blood vials, fabric fibers, and typewriter were unsealed. This time, the technology was different. The old blood sample, previously only identifiable as O+, had a few remaining cells extracted. The technician used the touch DNA method, separating gene strands from the dried protein layer. Each tiny bit of material was processed in a sterile chamber, run through the YSTR system, allowing identification of distinct genetic markers, even from degraded samples. After several days, the results came back. The DNA from the scene matched the gene profile stored from Caroline's mother, confirming that the blood in the house was the victim's. At the same time, the IBM typewriter was sent to the forensic document analysis room. The experts used multi-layer digital scanning techniques to separate each ink layer on the ribbon. When magnified, the line of text that Erica had discovered appeared clearer. "If you want to make someone disappear, start by cleaning the floor." That sequence of characters lay between two layers of legitimate text. One, a lecture draft by Thomas Murray, retrieved from university teaching records. Analysis of keystroke depth, type ball impact intensity, showed typing force, key angle, and compression, matching the writer's unique habits, like a biometric signature. Erica and the team of experts exchanged silent glances. The instructional sentence, typed on the victim's machine, by the hand of the once suspected person, like a confession hidden for 3 decades. Redding viewed the scan image, then said quietly, "I've seen a lot of strange evidence, but nothing that's spoken this loudly." He requested a full cross-check comparison with Murray's 1983 lecture samples, verification of keystroke intensity, examination of character misalignment. 3 days later, the results confirmed the text on the ribbon was typed by the same person as Thomas Murray's documents. In parallel, the lab completed the DNA report. The 2 gene strands matched perfectly. No nucleotide discrepancy. For the first time in 32 years, investigators had scientific evidence confirming the blood at the scene was Caroline's, and the device in her home had been used by the sole former suspect. When Redding received the printed results packet, he sat silently for a long time. In the small room, the ceiling fan turned slowly, light shining on the old photo of Caroline Rhodes taped to the front of the file. Everything seemed to return to the starting point. But this time, he knew for sure the story hadn't ended. He set the documents back on the table, looked up at Erica. "Prepare the file to reopen case FJ83 6112. We've found Caroline's voice. It's right there on the machine she used." The morning the official analysis results arrived, the Florida State Lab was nearly silent. The 12-page report sat in the middle of the table, with the bold printed line, "DNA profile match confirmed, Caroline Rhodes." Lieutenant Mark Redding put on his glasses, reading each line slowly. The touched DNA results from the dried blood sample on the victim's floor matched perfectly with Caroline's mother's gene profile, stored in the system since 1998. There was no doubt anymore. The blood streaks discovered under the stairs 32 years ago belonged to the teacher who vanished in 1983. In the chilly conference room space, Erica Dominguez placed a second document packet on the table. "And this," she said quietly, "is the ribbon result." Redding opened it, light from the window shining on the enlarged photo of the IBM ink ribbon scanned at high resolution. Between 2 thick layers of printed text was a faint row of characters, slightly tilted, readable in a chillingly clear way. "If you want to make someone disappear, start by cleaning the floor." The line was like a thin blade, slicing through the air. No one in the room said anything. A forensics expert who performed the analysis explained in a low voice, "We confirm this text lies between 2 different uses of the machine. One prior was a grammar lecture draft, and one after was a household chore list. Keystroke depression level, impact pressure, character spacing. All match the typing habits of the person who typed Thomas Murray's 1983 documents." She flipped to the next page. The comparison image displayed 2 lines of text, one from Murray's lecture draft stored at the University of North Florida, one from the ribbon segment on Caroline's typewriter. The S keystroke slightly tilted left, the T character often depressed 0.5 millimeter deeper than the rest of the line. Distinct features of the old type ball Murray used. Computer analysis gave the probability of coincidence at 1 in 6.7 billion, virtually 0. Redding looked at the image then closed his eyes. 32 years ago, he himself had collected that machine from the brightly lit room by the St. Johns River. Back then, it was just an ordinary item, no blood, no fingerprints, no one thought it important. Now each keystroke had spoken, recounting what Caroline could never tell. That afternoon, the forensic document analysis room held an internal presentation to announce the discovery details. On the screen, each ribbon layer photo was projected enlarged, interspersed with keystroke rhythm charts. An older technician, gray-haired, pointed to the chart. The writer used stronger force than usual on the 2 words "cleaning the floor," indicating emphasis, not accidental machine testing. This is a complete sentence, with meaning, impossible to be random coincidence. Erica stood in the corner of the room, feeling like she had just witnessed a moment where science turned into the voice of the dead. She didn't know Caroline, had never seen any photo of her beyond the old portrait in the file. But now, looking at those faint printed letters, she felt like she could hear a cry for help trapped in the metal for 3 decades. When the meeting ended, Redding called the city police command room. His voice was calm but firm. "We have DNA confirming the victim is dead, and evidence showing the suspect was at the scene. I want to reopen the Caroline Rhodes case. Transfer the file to active homicide investigation." There was silence on the other end, for a few seconds. Then the chief investigator's voice. "Do it, Mark. It's time." Late afternoon, he returned to the cold case room, where the typewriter was now kept in a humidity-controlled glass case. He placed his hand on the glass, his gaze stopping at the old seal label with his own 1983 signature. On it, the ink had faded, but Redding was still readable. "You've waited too long," he said quietly. Almost like an apology. That same week, the investigation team was re-established. Erica was assigned to handle the technical aspects, while Redding commanded overall. They reviewed the entire file, digging through every Polaroid photo, every statement. What 30 years ago was dismissed as type match was now re-examined with modern science. Shoe prints, fabric fibers, mud streaks, all sent to analysis rooms for spectral scanning, potentially tracing origins or specific brands. That evening, when Redding left the office, Jacksonville was immersed in a fiery red sunset. He stopped the car by the St. Johns River bank, right where Caroline once lived. The water was still reflecting lights from the new bridge. 32 years, that number suddenly felt short, because now the case was no longer a cold file in a steel vault. It had come back to life. On his desk the next morning, the file packet was placed prominently. New cover, boldly printed. FJ 836112, Active Homicide Investigation. Redding pulled out the old photo of Caroline, the one he had kept for years. She smiled kindly in a light-colored blouse, eyes looking straight into the lens. He folded the photo, placing it next to the printed ribbon text. "If you want to make someone disappear, start by cleaning the floor." For the first time in 3 decades, no one in the room called it suspected text. They knew for sure it was the killer's words, and that was the starting point for the final journey to bring justice back to the riverbank, where Caroline Rhodes once lived. The official reinvestigation launched in early June 2015, exactly 32 years from the day Caroline Rhodes vanished. Lieutenant Mark Redding, now all too familiar with the smell of old paper and the hum of file scanners, assembled a small team in the cold case unit. Technician Erica Dominguez, 2 young detectives from the criminal division, and a data analyst. "We start over from the night of June 12, 1983, he said. "No hypotheses, no emotions, just timelines and evidence." On the whiteboard in the middle of the conference room, Redding drew a thin line symbolizing that night, dividing it into markers. 7 p.m. Murray arrives at Caroline's house, 8:30. Neighbors see him leave. 9 o'clock. House lights still on. 11 o'clock. Strange noises by the river. Next morning. Caroline missing. If Murray left there at 8:30, Redding said, he had 4 hours before anyone noticed. 4 hours is enough to kill, transport the body, return and stage a normal evening. Erica opened her laptop, presenting newly retrieved data from landline phone records archives. In 1983, most local calls were recorded on Southern Bell Company tapes. A retired engineer had helped her access the digital copies. On the screen appeared 5 clear lines, 5 calls from Murray's home number to Caroline's, spanning from 5:42 to 6:18 p.m. on June 12. 3 were cut off after a few dozen seconds, the last lasting over 2 minutes. They might have been arranging a meeting, Erica said, pointing to the chart. The final timing matches when neighbors saw him arrive at her house. Another detective, Tom Barrett, handled rechecking rental car records. In the lawyer's office files, he found a copy of an invoice from Coastal Auto Rental in Jacksonville, dated June 10, 1983. Renter, Thomas E. Murray. Vehicle rented, brown Ford F-150, temporary plates. Vehicle returned June 14, 2 days after Caroline was reported missing. Reason for rental, noted on the form moving household items. Barrett placed the copy in front of Redding, saying, "This truck matches the description neighbors gave." Redding looked at the invoice, clenching his fist. In his mind, he replayed the scene from back then, the shallow tire ruts on the dirt, the narrow path leading to the riverbank, and the drag mark fading at the water's edge. Back then, they never found the vehicle, simply because Murray returned it on time, after cleaning it thoroughly. Now, every piece was starting to fit. Erica continued projecting a terrain map reconstructed with modern satellite imagery. From Caroline's house to the Julington Creek area was only a 4-minute drive, and from there to the main road another 5 minutes. If Murray left her house at 8:30, she said, he could have removed the body from the neighborhood before 9 without anyone noticing. On the way back, he could stop at a gas station or grocery to create an alibi. A detective added, "We've checked credit card receipts. He paid for gas at a Gulf station 7 miles from the scene at 9:41 p.m. Redding sat silently, eyes fixed on the map now dense with red markers. "A person can't be in 2 places at once," he said quietly. "And here, everything points in the same direction." He laid out the full timeline. Murray arrives, talks, attacks, cleans the scene, wraps the body, drags to the back fence, loads into the truck bed, moves along the trail to the water's edge. From there transports to the lowlands, south of Julington Creek, where the drag marks were found years ago. The journey ends before midnight. Enough time for him to return home, shower, and grade papers, as usual. The next day, the investigation team compared all the data with the old scene photos. Polaroid images of tire marks near the water showed wheelbase width matching the 1978 Ford F-150 line, the exact type Murray rented. Additionally, modern techniques allowed reanalysis of the photos, identifying mud containing sodium hypochlorite compounds, ingredients in cleaning solutions. That detail left everyone silent. "He knew exactly what to do," Redding said finally. "Not impulsive actions. This was planned." A week later, Redding signed the file submission to the Duval County State Attorney's Office, requesting reopening the Caroline Rhodes case on first-degree murder charges. In the over 100-page document packet, besides the DNA and physical evidence, he added the full new timeline, rental invoice, phone data, and simulated movement map. At the end of the file, he hand-wrote a short line. "We believe there is sufficient scientific and logical evidence to prove the crime occurred, and the responsible party is Thomas E. Murray." When the file envelope was sealed, Redding leaned back in his chair, sighing. Outside, Jacksonville had entered a new summer. 32 years ago, he had personally sealed this case, then stored it in cold storage. Now with his own hands, he sent it out to be reopened. And this time, it was no longer an anonymous disappearance, it was a named murder, with traces, and a specifically identified perpetrator. As the reinvestigation file neared completion, Lieutenant Mark Redding still agonized over one thing. No one had actually seen Thomas Murray leave Caroline's house with anything suspicious. Everything was still at the level of inference and traces. He remembered Mrs. Mary Wilkins, the neighbor living directly across from Caroline's house in 1983, the first to report to police, and the only witness who had seen Murray that night. If she was still alive, she might remember something they overlooked before. The old file showed Mrs. Wilkins had moved from Jacksonville in the late 1990s. Erica Dominguez tracked the new address through retirement databases and found she now lived in Gainesville at Maple Haven Nursing Home. The next morning, Redding and Erica drove over 2 hours to meet her. The woman from back then was now nearly 80, with snow-white hair, but her memory was surprisingly sharp. When Redding introduced himself as the one who once handled the Caroline Rhodes case, she gripped his hand tightly, eyes slightly wet. "I still think of her every time I pass the riverbank. I knew it was never over." Redding opened a small photo album, showing her an old picture of River Oak Street from 1983. She looked for a long time, then pointed to the green-roofed house. "That evening I was closing the windows. It was around 8:30, maybe a bit later. I saw the light in Caroline's house still on. Then I saw a man in a light-colored shirt, like cream, walking across the front yard. He was carrying a long object, wrapped in a dark blanket, slung over both shoulders. I thought they were moving stuff, so I didn't pay attention. But I remember he walked slowly, trying to keep balance. The room's atmosphere suddenly went still. Erica asked quietly. "Did you see his face clearly, Mrs. Wilkins?" nodded. "Not very clearly. The porch light was dim, but his hair was light, cut short, and his gait slightly hunched. I remember because it was different from Caroline's son's posture. It was only the next morning I learned she was missing. When I saw the ex-husband's photo in the paper, I shuddered. It was him." Redding pulled out a 6-photo lineup of men around Murray's age, from back then, all in light shirts. He let Mrs. Wilkins view each one without prompting. She hesitated at the third, then slowly tapped the table. "This one. I remember the eyes, and the way he bowed his head while walking. It's him." Erica recorded the statement, ensuring all procedures followed 2015 standards, Federal Eyewitness Protocol, Independent Identification Process. No suggestions, with a third-party monitor confirmation. The result was noted as positive identification, definitive identification. This new testimony, though from an elderly witness, was still valid and fully legally admissible. As they left the nursing home, Redding was silent for a long time. In the car, Erica asked, "Do you think she remembers accurately?" He replied, "After 30 years, people can forget a lot, but not images that scared them, and I believe her." The next day, Mary Wilkins' statement was added to file FJ 83-6112, along with the DNA results, rental invoice, phone data, and typewriter evidence. This testimony became the final piece Redding had waited for over 3 decades. The state prosecutor read the file, flipping through each page, then looked up. "Enough basis. We'll seek an arrest warrant." That evening, when Redding signed the prosecution request form, wind from the St. Johns River blew in again. 32 years later, the shadow of the night of June 12, 1983 finally took clear shape, a man in a light shirt, carrying a long object wrapped in a blanket, silently stepping out of the brightly lit house. And the next morning, the woman named Caroline Rhodes vanished forever. A few days after Mary Wilkins' statement was recorded, file FJ 83-6112 was transferred to the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, BAU, in Quantico. Lieutenant Mark Redding knew that, to obtain an official arrest warrant, they needed a complete behavioral profile, something that could answer the question that had haunted him for 3 decades. Why did Thomas Murray kill Caroline Rhodes? The small conference room, walls covered in suspect diagrams and case timelines. 3 BAU behavioral specialists attended: Special Agent Dr. Elaine Foster, expert in domestic homicides; Agent Carl Rizzo, language analysis specialist; and Dr. Howard Lang, academic criminal psychology expert. They reviewed all the materials from DNA results, 1983 interview transcripts, to the typewriter ribbon photo containing the chilling line, "If you want to make someone disappear, start by cleaning the floor." "This is a classic case of spousal control homicide," Dr. Foster began. "When an intellectual man, accustomed to control, loses control in a relationship, especially when the wife initiates leaving, the murder is often impulsive, but executed with clear planning. He didn't just want to eliminate the victim, he wanted to erase her defiance." Carl Rizzo, who had studied Murray's lectures and letters, pointed to a paper with quoted excerpts. "I want to emphasize the phrase 'make someone disappear' on the ribbon. This isn't a random cluster. The use of the verb make shows he viewed the act as an active, conscious process, and cleaning the floor isn't just a metaphor, it's a literal instruction." Redding looked at the ribbon photo, the black ink fading. "He knew exactly what he was doing," he said quietly. "The blood was wiped, the scene clean, no forced door, no noise. Everything was so neat, it was excessive." Dr. Lang nodded. "That's a classic sign of offender familiarity, the perpetrator familiar with the victim and the crime scene. He was confident because he knew every spot in the house, knew how to erase traces, knew where the light didn't reach. When the victim is attacked in a familiar environment, the perpetrator tends to clean up rather than flee immediately, because subconsciously, it's still his space. All three agents agreed that Murray's behavior showed high control and obsession. When Caroline decided to leave and demanded custody, he lost the dominance he always took for granted, Foster said. He's not an impulsive, violent type, but someone who plans in silence. Intelligent, arrogant, believing he's clever enough to outsmart the law. Redding provided more details in the 1983 interview. Murray didn't ask, "How is she?" but only said, "If I were you, I'd look at me first." Carl Rizzo noted, a classic sign of intellectual narcissism. The perpetrator believes his intelligence is an impenetrable shield. Dr. Foster signed last, pushing the file toward Redding. He didn't kill just out of jealousy, he killed because he couldn't stand being rejected. People like Murray don't go mad, they calculate. But that calculation itself left traces. Redding reread the conclusion, his finger trembling slightly as he touched the last line. High probability offender, acted alone. Each word like the final stamp on the doubt he had carried for 3 decades. He looked around the room, his voice slow but clear. So we have enough. Motive, evidence, witnesses, behavior, every piece fits. The next day, the FBI behavioral profile was sent along with all the new evidence to the Duval State Attorney's Office. In Redding's notes section, he wrote briefly, "Request issuance of arrest warrant for Thomas E. Murray on first-degree murder charge." That afternoon, he stood alone in the parking lot, looking up at the Jacksonville sky turning golden. In his pocket, the FBI report copy still warm from the printer. 32 years ago, Murray had left the Riverside house with a blanket wrapping something no one dared name. Now, the behavioral profile had revealed his true self. And this time, there was no place to hide. Early morning on September 14, 2015, the sky over Gainesville still misty when 2 unmarked police cars quietly pulled up in front of the single-story brick house at the end of Pine Meadow Court. In the yard, wildflowers grew mixed with knee-high weeds, and the old Ford F-150, now repainted silver gray, parked neatly by the porch. Inside the house, Thomas Edward Murray, 67, was sitting reading the newspaper. His reading glasses slipped halfway down his nose. When the door was knocked 3 times hard, he stood up, still maintaining his usual composure. "Thomas Murray?" Lieutenant Mark Redding's voice sounded from outside the door. "Yes, that's me. Duval County Police. You are under arrest on a warrant for first-degree murder in connection with the death of Caroline Rhodes." Murray's gaze froze for a split second. Then he adjusted his glasses, smiling faintly. 30 years, and you still haven't stopped obsessing." 2 officers stepped forward, reading the arrest warrant clearly. He didn't resist, just said softly, "I'll need a lawyer." At the Jacksonville Police Headquarters, Interrogation Room 3, the old room Redding had used many years before, was prepared again. On the table, thick file packets and the forensic ribbon photo were placed ready. Murray entered, hands cuffed, posture still straight, face not much different from his 1983 photo. The same small smile at the corner of the mouth, the dry, cold eyes of someone who always believed he understood the game better than anyone. When the investigator began the interrogation, he didn't wait long to speak up. "Did you find her body?" Murray asked, voice even, cold. Redding replied, "Not yet. But we have everything else." He slumped into the chair, hands clasped, still appearing calm. "I didn't kill anyone," he said. "As for the typewriter, I only typed on it a few times. I'm a writer, not a killer." Redding opened the document packet, pushing the forensic ribbon photo toward him. In the light, the faint black text appeared clearly. "If you want to make someone disappear, start by cleaning the floor." Murray paused. The smile on his lips faded. He stared at the photo for a long time, eyes unblinking. "Did you write this?" Redding asked. "I don't remember. We have evidence confirming the keystroke force, key depression, and frequency matching the lecture you wrote in 1983. You call that coincidence? Maybe I was testing the machine. Maybe it was a joke. I don't remember. Redding didn't respond. He turned on the large screen displaying satellite images, timeline maps, the Ford F-150 rental invoice, Mary Wilkins' statement, and the FBI behavioral report. When it came to the description, a man in a light shirt, carrying a long object wrapped in a blanket, leaving the victim's house. Murray turned his face away, taking a deep breath. Thomas, Redding said slowly, voice like someone weary. For 32 years, you've lived peacefully, teaching, writing books, but Caroline has been lying somewhere out there forever. You knew we'd find out. The DNA has spoken, the typewriter has spoken. Now it's just you. 7 hours passed in the windowless interrogation room. Murray remained silent most of the time, occasionally responding briefly. I don't remember, or not relevant. But his eyes gradually changed, not the smugness anymore, but a weary, bewildered gaze like someone who had reached the end of the road. When the wall clock showed 9:08 p.m., Redding stood up, placing Caroline's photo in front of him. This is the woman who once called you husband, the father of your daughter. You owe her the truth. Murray looked at the photo, his lips moving as if to say something, then gently placed his hand on his forehead. Nearly a minute passed, the hum of the air conditioner the only sound in the room. Finally, he exhaled very softly.
Behind the woods.
Julington Creek. There's an old dirt pit. The room fell silent. Redding nodded slightly, not surprised, not triumphant. He just asked, where exactly?
The old trail south of the water's edge, where the oak tree is broken.
I just wanted to clean up. No intent to kill, just lost control. Murray bowed his head, hands trembling slightly. Redding left the room, ordering the forensics team mobilized. Prepare the excavation team, Julington Creek area, southern forest section. After dawn the next day, halogen lights illuminated the entire low forest. Police strung tape around a damp clearing, where according to Murray was where he buried her. The characteristic Florida smell of mud and decaying leaves thick in the air. Shovels plunged into the soft ground, layers of earth carefully removed. After nearly 2 hours, one of the technicians called out, "There's something here." Everyone stopped quickly. A faint white bone segment emerged from the mud, small, slender, the forearm. A few inches away, more bone fragments, arranged in the shape of a body lying on its side. A dark rotted fabric scrap still clung, stuck with mud and roots. As they continued excavating, a small object gleamed under the light, a tarnished silver necklace, pendant shaped like a flower, engraved with CR. Erica bent down, her hand trembling slightly as she picked it up with tweezers. "Matches the photo of the victim wearing it in the file," she said quietly. Redding stood behind, silently watching. 32 years, and finally Caroline Rhodes had been found. Not just a name in a file, but a real person, lying under the soil where he had searched throughout his career. When the bone bags were sealed, dawn began to break over Julington Creek. The first sunlight touched the water, reflecting off the freshly cleaned silver necklace. Redding looked at it, feeling both peace and pain. He knew the investigation wasn't over. Now was when Caroline returned to justice, and Thomas Murray had to face what he had avoided for over 3 decades. The analysis results were sent to the Jacksonville Police Department 10 days after the forensics team completed the excavation. In the sealed envelope stamped by the Florida State Lab, the bold printed line on the first page made Lieutenant Mark Redding read it 3 times. DNA profile, full match. Caroline Rhodes. All analyses matched perfectly. The gene sequence from the bone marrow matched the blood sample in Caroline's mother's medical records, and the hair fibers collected from the soil around the skull matched exactly with her hair stored in the old evidence. After 32 years, science had finally confirmed what he had always known in his heart. Caroline Rhodes was dead, and her body was the one lying under the mud in the Julington Creek forest. The analysis report was over 50 pages, covering the entire chain of evidence from 1983 to 2015. Each piece connected by scientific data, no longer hypotheses or guesses. The first line of the summary table read, blood, matched to victim. Ribbon, linked to suspect. Confession, led to body. Everything closed perfectly, a straight line throughout, from the first blood stain in the brightly lit house, to the characters on the IBM typewriter, and finally, the confession revealing the burial site. All evidence pointed to one person, Thomas Edward Murray. The forensics room detailed the remains examination results. Fracture marks on the back of the skull indicated a strong blow with a hard object. Direction from left to right, matching the description of blood spatter injuries on the house stairs. On the ribs, there were horizontal drag marks, indicating the body was dragged after death. The rotted fabric scrap found with the body was identified as a burgundy velour blanket, the type listed as missing from Caroline's house. The silver necklace engraved CR had oxidized, but the inner engraving was still clear. Each detail was an answer to the question the case had left for over 30 years. What happened on the night of June 12, 1983? Redding read the conclusion in silence, only hearing the ceiling fan turning slowly above. He folded the file shut, sighing. She finally gets to be called by her right name, not missing victim, but murdered person. Beside him, technician Erica Dominguez nodded quietly. She had read every page, every DNA test code, every gene spectrum chart. All led to an undeniable conclusion. Caroline Rhodes was murdered in her home. Her body moved, the perpetrator someone familiar to her, and no one other than Thomas Murray. The prosecution file was prepared in the next 2 weeks. Duval State Attorney Angela Hollis, who had prosecuted many no-body murders, considered this one of the most solidly built files she had ever seen. She requested the investigation team compile the entire chain of physical and behavioral evidence in chronological order. The O+ blood sample discovered at the scene in 1983, now identified by DNA as Caroline Rhodes's. The IBM typewriter ribbon containing the line, "If you want to make someone disappear, start by cleaning the floor with keystroke pressure and key pattern matching Thomas Murray's lecture." The brown Ford F-150 rental invoice from June 10, 1983, along with witness data confirming the vehicle near the scene. Mrs. Mary Wilkins' statement, the neighbor, seeing a man in a light shirt carrying a long object wrapped in a blanket leaving the victim's house that evening. Identification matching Thomas Murray. Murray's 2015 interrogation confession, precisely indicating the location where the body was found, containing information only the perpetrator would know. The FBI Behavioral Unit report was attached at the end, stating clearly, high-probability offender acted alone. Motivated by loss of control and rejection, the entire thing was sent to the Florida grand jury for indictment approval. In the Jacksonville Police Department conference room, Redding stood before the prosecution team and summarized the case, his voice hoarse but clear. "We have the victim's blood, a confession leading to the body, words written by the suspect, and a direct witness seeing him leave the scene. This is no longer a disappearance. This is a deliberate murder, planned and concealed by the arrogance of someone who believed he was smarter than justice." No one in the room said another word, only the printer hummed as the 30-page indictment was signed and stamped. On October 6, 2015, the Duval County State Attorney's Office officially announced the indictment of Thomas Edward Murray for first-degree premeditated murder under Section 782.04 of the Florida Criminal Code. The charge carried the maximum penalty, life imprisonment without parole or death. When the indictment was announced, local media quickly reported, 1983 cold case solved, professor arrested in murder of ex-wife. Public shock. Many of Murray's former students couldn't believe the model professor from back then was accused of killing his wife. And Caroline's family, after over 3 decades living in the shadow of doubt and loss, finally could hear the words justice mentioned alongside her name. That day, Redding sat alone in his office, looking through the window toward the St. Johns River bank, where it all began. He opened the old photo of Caroline, the young woman with a gentle smile, eyes bright with life, then looked at the file packet coded FJ80-36112, just transferred to Duval County Court. 32 years, a circle closed. Every line of text, every bloodstain, every fabric scrap led to this day. Before leaving the office, he signed an additional line in the transfer log. All evidences and forensic materials have been authenticated, cataloged, and delivered to Duval County Court for trial. All had been authenticated, cataloged, and handed over for trial. Outside, Jacksonville's afternoon sky cast orange sunlight on the river surface, sparkling like the dried bloodstain from years ago under fluorescent light. Redding said softly, as if to the woman he never forgot, "You've waited 32 years, Caroline. Now justice is coming." At Duval County Court, the case file was placed on the judge's bench with a bright red seal. A case thought buried by time had been revived by the power of science, the perseverance of people who wouldn't forget, and the truth that couldn't be erased. The Caroline Rhodes case, 1983, was officially added to Florida's priority trial list, and this time, no one called it a cold case anymore. On May 4, 2016, the Duval County Circuit Court was packed. Outside, Florida media set up long rows of cameras, reporters crowding the steps of the old white stone courthouse. In the first row of the courtroom, Helen Rhodes, Caroline's mother, sat quietly beside Caroline's daughter, now 38, Kiara Rhodes, who had grown up never knowing why her mother disappeared. Across from them, Thomas Edward Murray entered in an orange prison jumpsuit, his gait still slow, head slightly bowed. Though over 60, he still maintained the neatness of a professor, but his eyes had lost the arrogant confidence of old. The trial was presided over by Judge Marcus Heller. From the start, prosecutor Angela Hollis declared, "This is not a case of the past. This is a case of justice, justice delayed for 32 years. Throughout the first morning, the prosecution presented the entire chain of evidence, each forensic piece recreated like a reverse timeline. The blood drops on Caroline's stairs, the IBM typewriter ribbon, the Ford F-150 rental invoice, neighbor Mary Wilkins' statement, and especially the DNA sample matching perfectly with the remains excavated from the Julington Creek forest. On the large screen, the forensic photo was projected. The faint text on the ribbon appeared clear, chilling like a mechanical confession. "If you want to make someone disappear, start by cleaning the floor," Hollis said, voice calm but firm. He didn't just write that sentence, he executed it, step by step. The courtroom fell silent. A few in the audience bowed their heads slightly, some with tears welling. Kiara turned her face away when the image of the silver necklace engraved CR appeared. Defense attorney David Klein stood to counter. He argued that circumstantial evidence couldn't prove intent. "Your Honor, my client was coerced in an interrogation without counsel. His mention of the dirt pit was not a confession, but a suggestion to help find the missing person. And don't forget, 32 years, no body, no weapon, no direct witness at the scene." Klein tried to keep his voice firm, but Hollis just smiled, pulling out the new forensic report. "We don't need witnesses when science has spoken," she called Erica Dominguez, the young cold case unit technician, to testify. Erica detailed the analysis process. The DNA sample from the blood in the house in 1983 matches completely with Caroline Rhodes' DNA. The IBM typewriter ribbon retains keystroke pressure marks, character spacing, matching the defendant's writing sample. We used touch DNA technology to identify biological traces on the enter key of the machine, and the result matches Thomas Murray. Klein objected. "There's no way to determine that biological trace wasn't contaminated after 30 years. Erica replied concisely, eyes straight. "All samples were sealed intact, stored in cold storage from 1983 to now. No signs of contamination, no errors. And to emphasize, only the person who typed that line would leave biological traces in that position." The prosecution continued calling Special Agent Dr. Elaine Foster from the FBI Behavioral Unit, who had profiled Murray. She presented, "Thomas Murray belongs to the highly organized offender group, acting out of loss of power control in the marriage. He didn't kill impulsively, he staged it, from writing down his thoughts, cleaning the scene, to disposing of the body. This is a classic pattern of spousal control homicide. When Hollis presented the next piece of evidence, the audio clip, excerpted from the 2015 interrogation, the jury nearly held their breath. The screen replayed the segment of Murray sitting at the table, hands clasped tightly, voice hoarse and weary. Behind the woods, Julington Creek. There's an old dirt pit. Then, after a few seconds of silence, the next sound rang out. Low, trembling, almost a whisper. She's still there, under the trees. That sound made the entire courtroom dead silent. Helen Rhodes burst into tears, Kiara gripping her hand tightly. Hollis turned to the jury. We don't need to imagine. He said it himself, and under those trees we found Caroline. Defense attorney Klein tried to rally an objection, claiming the audio recording didn't constitute an admission of guilt, just an emotional speculation. But Judge Heller banged the gavel, overruling, a statement leading to the discovery of the victim's body. That's irrefutable evidence. In the days that followed, the trial continued with testimony from dozens of witnesses and experts. Mary Wilkins, though frail, appeared, recounting the last time she saw Murray that night. Her voice trembled, but was clear. I saw him, in a light shirt, carrying something long wrapped in a blanket. I can't forget it. When Hollis asked, "Are you sure that man was Thomas Murray?" she replied, without hesitation. I'm as sure as I'm standing here. The defense had little room left to maneuver. They tried to revive doubts about the 1983 investigation procedures, but every gap had been proven by modern technology. An independent forensics expert appointed by the court stood to confirm no signs of fabrication, no procedural errors. This is one of the most solid chains of evidence I've ever seen in an old case file. On the 12th day of the trial, Prosecutor Hollis stepped forward for closing arguments. She looked straight at the jury, her voice steady and resonant. Thomas Murray thought his intelligence could outsmart the law. He thought wiping the blood would erase the crime. But the truth remained on the floor, in the typewriter, in the mud at Julington Creek. For 32 years, Caroline Rhodes was buried in silence. But today she has spoken through science, through justice, and through his own admissions. The courtroom held its breath as the jury retired to deliberate. 1 hour, 2 hours passed. When they returned, the foreman read the verdict, voice firm. We, the jury of the state of Florida, having considered all the evidence, find the defendant Thomas Edward Murray guilty of first-degree premeditated murder. The judge's gavel sounded dry and sharp. Helen Rhodes burst into sobs, Kiara hugging her shoulders tightly. Murray sat motionless, eyes staring into the empty space ahead. No anger, no pleading, just emptiness. When the judge pronounced sentence, life imprisonment without parole, he closed his eyes, head slightly bowed, as if finally accepting the inevitable. Prosecutor Hollis didn't celebrate, just bowed her head to the jury. Redding, sitting at the back of the row, quietly stood up. He had completed a long journey, from the first night stepping into the brightly lit house by the St. Johns River, to this morning, when justice was named. Outside the courthouse, a light wind from the river carried the scent of salt and earth. Kiara approached, taking Redding's hand, saying softly, "Thank you. Because of you, my mom gets to come home." He just smiled, replying quietly, "It wasn't me. It was her who never stopped demanding justice." That afternoon in Jacksonville was bathed in brilliant sunshine. Johns River sparkled like metal. For the first time in over 3 decades, the name Caroline Rhodes echoed, not in a missing persons file, but in a conviction verdict, like proof that truth can be buried, but never forgotten. News of the Thomas Edward Murray verdict spread across Florida within hours of the court's pronouncement. That evening, most local TV stations opened their broadcasts with the same ticker headline, "Longest cold case cracked thanks to retroactive forensics, justice for Caroline Rhodes," after 32 years. Images of the IBM typewriter were replayed, alongside the faint black text on the ribbon. If you want to make someone disappear, start by cleaning the floor. Many viewers shuddered. A WJXT reporter commented, retroactive forensic technology, re-examining old evidence with DNA methods and keystroke mechanics analysis, turned a typing machine into a witness for justice. In Jacksonville, the community's reaction was one of shock and sorrow. Local papers called it the tragedy of self-destructive intelligence, the story of an educated man who once taught about language and thought, but used that very intellect to hide his own crime. An editorial in the Florida Times-Union wrote, "For 3 decades, he continued teaching about truth, while the truth he feared most lay under the soil, less than 10 miles from his home. In the end, it wasn't words, but science that spoke." Murray's former students were stunned. Many recounted how they had admired him as an intellectual icon. "It's hard to believe," one former pupil told the press. "I remember him lecturing on Shakespeare about how words can conceal or reveal human nature. Now thinking back, that saying means something entirely different." In contrast, the Jacksonville community held a small memorial by the St. Johns River bank, where Caroline once lived. Dozens of residents, many who never knew her, brought flowers and candles to place under a sign reading, "Justice for Caroline." Her mother, Helen Rhodes, stood before the crowd, voice trembling but clear. "Justice came 32 years late, but it came. Thank you to everyone who didn't forget my daughter." Beside her, Kiera quietly held her hand, eyes gazing out at the river that once took her mother and now returned the truth. Within Florida's justice system, the Caroline Rhodes case was seen as a major turning point. The term forensic retroactive, tentatively translated as retrospective forensics, was mentioned for the first time in a state-level criminal case, reanalyzing old evidence with modern DNA technology, processing degraded traces, and matching behavioral data with physical proof. The Jacksonville Police Department and Lieutenant Mark Redding's Cold Case Unit were honored at the 2016 Law Enforcement Innovation Award ceremony. On the podium, accepting the award, Redding, who had devoted more than half his life to pursuing the case, said simply, "We weren't looking for victory, we just didn't want a woman to be forgotten." The quote was reprinted on the front pages of many newspapers. Below it was an image of the old file box, lid stamped with #FJ836112, now boldly marked in red, "Case solved." Forensics experts across the United States viewed it as a model example of combining technology with human perseverance. At a University of Florida symposium, Dr. Elaine Foster from the FBI said, "What makes this case special isn't just the technology, but that people never gave up. If no one had kept the typewriter, if no one remembered that file code, today's DNA and computers would have nothing left to analyze." Law enforcement agencies nationwide began reviewing thousands of cold cases from the 1980s. A new wave in criminal investigations emerged, finding justice through forgotten evidence. In Jacksonville, a small exhibit opened in the police department grounds, displaying the most famous evidence. The IBM Selectric II typewriter, Caroline's silver necklace, and a replica of the ribbon text etched onto a glass plaque, "If you want to make someone disappear, start by cleaning the floor." But right below that line, another sentence was engraved, quoted from prosecutor Angela Hollis's closing in the trial. "Justice came 30 decades late, but it still came. And this time, it speaks the language of science." On the last afternoon before retiring, Mark Redding returned to the old storage room where it all began. The cold metal shelves were now neatly organized, hundreds of old file boxes still sitting there, waiting for another day to be opened. He paused at the small gap in row B, where box FJ80-36112 once stood. On the shelf, a small plaque replaced the box, inscribed, "Case reopened 2015, solved 2016. Redding touched the shelf edge, smiling faintly. To him, the Caroline Rhodes case wasn't just a professional victory, but proof of a simple truth: no crime can hide forever under the dust of time, as long as someone still believes in the truth. Outside, Jacksonville's afternoon sun bathed the St. Johns River in warm gold. A breeze rustled through, gently shaking the white flowers placed on the dock, where residents still came each year to remember the young teacher murdered in 1983. And amid the lapping waves, one could hear the whisper of a city that had just reclaimed justice for one of its own, Caroline Rhodes, finally at peace. The story of Caroline Rhodes reminds us that justice in the United States can come late, but doesn't disappear, as long as people and files endure. The very real-life details in the case offer practical lessons. Neighbor Mary Wilkins noticed the light shirt and long object wrapped in a blanket, then held that memory for over 30 years. Young technician Erica Dominguez didn't overlook the IBM typewriter ribbon and discovered the faint line. If you want to make someone disappear, start by cleaning the floor. The cold case unit used touch DNA, YS-TAR, to link the O+ blood streak in the house with the remains under the Julington Creek forest. From there, advice for the present: if you're in a controlling relationship, being stalked, threatened, the other person suddenly cleaning excessively after an argument, make a safety plan. Notify trusted people, photograph small scene details, bruises, displaced items, save messages, call logs, like the 5 calls between Caroline and Murray on the evening of June 12th. Consider a protection order and contact domestic violence hotlines. For the community, don't dismiss petty details. The beige fabric snagged on palmetto, the faint drag mark, or the engine noise at 11 p.m. became keys. For agencies, preserve and digitize old evidence. Retroactive forensics resolve this tragedy. And for each of us, trust intuition, document, report early, because justice needs not just science, but vigilant, brave citizens who speak up about what they see. If you believe no crime can be buried forever under time, hit subscribe to join us in following cold cases uncovered by the power of truth and science. Thanks for watching to the end. See you in the next video from True Crime Files, where every story is a journey in search of justice.